Antonia Ferrier, a very good friend of mine and a very good friend of Poland's. Welcome.
Thank you.
We've got about 20 minutes to talk about the most important political developments unfolding these days across the globe. So without further ado, let me ask you a question about yet another diplomatic spat that has just erupted recently between the United States and a European ally, namely the Spanish government's refusal to allow American air tankers to use one of those military bases located in Spain, which immediately prompted a very harsh response on the part of President Trump, who threatened to cut all trade ties with Madrid. Do you believe that this is the acceptable modus operandi, both on the part of the American leader, and also should other European political leaders follow the Spanish Prime Minister's assertiveness in their approach to the White House?
I feel like as an American being up here, it takes some courage, which is the theme of this conference after all. To answer that question, I think you have to be pragmatic because the economic markets of the United States and Europe writ large are deeply integrated. And so you have to be pragmatic. But there's a lot of politics at play here. Number one, let's just start with Donald Trump. He has never had a problem punching people rhetorically in the face. I think we're over a year in now. It feels like 270 years into this administration. This is just what he does. Is it acceptable? I mean, my mother taught me manners. It's not how I would act. I think many American ambassadors and many American officials treat Europeans with a fundamental lack of respect and courtesy. I think that we have an expression where that honey goes much further than vinegar. I think that would go a lot further than just rhetorically punching people in the face.
Among European leaders, who understands Trump best? Is it President of Finland, Mr. Stolp? German Chancellor, Mr. Merz? Giorgia Meloni, maybe? Or perhaps the Polish president?
It's a very good question. I think it depends on any given day and any given thing that the president may or may not see. Everyone always talks about Prime Minister Meloni as being the president's sweetheart. Some days she seems to do well. Some days your president seems to do well. Mr. Merz?
I thought she was Elon Musk's sweetheart.
Wait, say that again?
Giorgia Meloni?
Yeah.
Elon Musk's sweetheart? Wasn't she?
I mean, I'm not even going to answer that. I think at any given day, it's really a question of what the president sees or not. So, for example, with the Brits, they thought they had a deal with the United States, an understanding with this island, the Chagos Island, until someone got into his ear and told him no. So if you're the Brits, you're like, I thought this was all handled and done, and then it's not. So this idea that at any given time anything is set in stone with this president, I think is very challenging. Tariffs, I think, is a really important point, right? The Supreme Court said no. What the president did under this he used something called IEEPA, was not constitutional. And he said, well, I'm going to find another way to go do this. So if you're Germany, go back to Mr. Merz, he has the fortunate or unfortunate task of having to go to Washington, sit in that hot boiling tub of oil, which is the Oval Office, with hundreds of cameras there, and he has two things that he has to talk to the president about: Russia, Ukraine, and trade. And then he's sitting there, and the president starts going after Spain and the UK. Not exactly sure what he should have done differently. I think he handled it as best he could. I know he got a lot of criticism that he didn't stick up for the Spanish, he didn't stick up for the Brits. But when you have an agenda, just trade, and he was basically there on behalf of the European Union and all its member states, and on behalf of the largest security threat that Europe faces, which is Russia, he needed to stick to the script and not get into a big public fight with the president.
Speaking of security threats and the overall security outlook, especially in this part of Europe, I think another bone of contention in this bilateral relationship, and I believe you share this impression, is Europe's lacks approach to its own military capabilities. But my understanding is that Europe is now facing an excruciating dilemma. On the one hand, we have to keep assuring Mr. Trump that we are willing and capable of taking care of ourselves, ramping up our military expenditures, especially those countries on the eastern flank. On the other hand, though, we need US troops on European soil. And we have to convince him that even a partial withdrawal of American presence from Europe would be extremely detrimental to our own security.
Yes, that is all true. And I think right now you guys are basically buying time. I think that you see that a bit with Mark Rutte, who is the NATO Secretary General, right? I have a lot of European family. My aunt, who just passed away, but she's Dutch, and she hated what Mark Rutte did calling Trump daddy. She thought it was just below the office, just ridiculous thing to say. But if you're Mark Rutte, right, you're heading NATO, you know that Europe lacks many capabilities. Long-range weapons. There was this discussion yesterday evening with some Czech colleagues who were here. You don't have the entire mix you need to protect yourselves. So I think from Mark Rutte and many other European leaders, they're trying to buy time to try and build out your capabilities. Right now, what do you have to substitute for the Patriots? You don't. There are things happening, but it's just, there are too many gaps. So, I mean, I believe that Albert Colby, who is a senior official in the Pentagon, he committed that to Poland. No, US troops would not leave Poland, but there is a huge US presence in Germany, and they use German bases to forward deploy into the Middle East, for example. So I think it's going to be for the near term, and by near term, I really think the next 5 years, you're gonna have to play a bit of a game with the United States of having to find ways to keep the United States engaged. But the challenge with that is public opinion, of course, because every time Donald Trump or one of his officials in Europe says something or does something completely offensive, that turns public opinion away from the United States. And the challenge also with that is that while you guys lack defense capabilities, your economies, Poland notwithstanding, need real reform. And there's two sides of this coin. American private investment that has nothing to do with Donald Trump really is important to European growth and security. You can't have a strong military and national security unless you have strong economic growth. They go hand in hand. So I want a strong Europe. I am a strong European. I'm British-born, American-raised, with loads of family that live on this continent. You guys can do this, but you need to be smart about it. And one of my favorite English language expressions is not cut off your nose to spite your face. Be smart. Don't overreact or overcalibrate. But I know it's hard. You know, just the last thing I will say, Charles Kushner, who's the US ambassador in France, he did something that is almost unthinkable. He weighed in on a domestic issue in France that he should not have done. He was called to the foreign ministry and he didn't even show up. That is like a diplomatic incident. I don't think that's happened in France for decades with the United States. It's just not how you should handle things. And I do think there's a bit right now in American circles of Europe's weak, it's pathetic. I don't agree with that. But it's just this sort of attitude of we can kick them around and they still need us, so we can continue to be rude. I'm not sure that's a smart way to go for the United States, but I also just again would say don't be impractical in your approach.
Following up on what you said about the military industry, Poland and some other countries in Europe have always been heavily dependent on imports of weaponry from US defense contractors. At first sight, a reasonable direction of travel, logical, given the special character of especially of Poland's relationship with America and the quality of American armament. However, that posture, I mean Poland's, has somehow entailed harsh criticism on the part of other major European capitals, in particular Paris, and Berlin. Should we buy American or should we buy European?
I don't think it's an either-or situation. If you don't have certain capabilities, you have to buy them from where you have them. Poland made a decision, right? And Mark, you know this better than I do. After Russia did its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, you needed to build out your military and you needed to build it out fast. Who is the largest military industrial complex in the world? It's out of the United States. Made a decision of speed to build out capabilities. That's why you have one of the fiercest ground forces probably in the world, if not in Europe, certainly. You had to make that decision. Moreover, if you were to say, okay, we don't want to buy the F-35s, we'll go buy the Gripens. Well, guess what? The engine in the Gripen, it's a Swedish aircraft, fighter jet, is made in America. Many of these systems are really integrated. So it's not an either or, and it can't be, at least for some time. Now, there are a lot of capabilities that are being built out. There is a German-British company that just launched successfully a hypersonic missile out of Norway. So I think you need to, one, be, again, practical. What do you need to do now? And then where do you want to go and build out for the future? And I think that needs to be something that if I were in the Polish government, you've got certain capabilities, you know you've got the ground force, you've got the armor, the various pieces, where you want to invest jointly, potentially, with other European countries in various spaces. And one thing I think is really important, and Mark has heard me say this before, I really think that one of the most, if not the most important relationship in Europe is between Poland and Germany. I think it would be in Europe's best interest, in Poland's best interest, if Poland were to be invited into the E3. I think it should be the E4. So it's no longer just the UK, France, and Germany. I understand why that structure existed because of post-World War II history. The threat has moved east. The capabilities are east between Ukraine, the Balts, you guys, the Finns. It makes sense for Poland to have a seat at the table in the E4. And some people say E5 with Italy, but I certainly think that Poland needs to have a seat at that in the table, given where it is and given the incredible defense posture that you all have.
Well, I have to confess we've already had very heated discussions with Antonia about the special character of the Polish-German relationship. We were rarely, in agreement on that, but I do understand your point. Dear Antonia, the debate in Europe about the nuclear arsenal is picking up steam, also in Poland, in light of some recent remarks by some senior American policymakers. The US envoy to NATO said a few weeks ago something in the vein that the United States is ready to protect Europe, but only conventionally. President Macron is speaking openly about the possibility of extending the French nuclear umbrella to other countries, including Poland. What should Poland's position be in this particular debate?
I think it makes a lot of strategic sense. I mean, look, the United States, there's the nuclear triad where the United States has all three sort of nuclear capabilities, so ground, air, and sea. And we have a lot of them. And the Russians have quite a few nuclear weapons as well. I think we should expect the nuclear deterrent from the United States to continue to exist, but I also think it's, again, very reasonable and fair for Europe to say, okay, we need to think about this on our own. Dare I say, and I love France to death, but France has had a very particular attitude towards the United States, shall we say. I will say last year being in Munich, I was with two Frenchmen after J.D. Vance had a rather interesting speech there, and two Frenchmen said, aha, de Gaulle was right. And I was like, oh, good Lord, de Gaulle was right. But look, this discussion about strategic autonomy, it's worth having. There have been many discussions for several years now about nuclear and what should be done. I think it makes sense to have those conversations. And of course, Poland, again, it is the most important country in Europe in terms of defense, and to be a part of those discussions, I would just hope when it comes to nuclear weapons, it needs to be done thoughtfully and smartly, because these aren't just, little drones, they're a nuclear weapon. There is a reason the Japanese, after the Second World War, Godzilla came about in response. I mean, I know it may be crazy for me to talk about Godzilla, but their response to the attacks of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there is a national consensus about fear of it. So I think we need to be very thoughtful and careful about it, but you need to have a nuclear deterrent because your big eastern neighbor has many, many of them. And it's not impossible to see Putin maybe one day saying, I might do just a tactical nuclear strike. I mean, we all hope not, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Lastly, let me ask you a question which at first sight sounds more philosophical than geopolitical. Poland has, since the transition in 1989, Poland has been struggling to create the image of a full-fledged European country. In our narrative, the very adjective European has always been a handy flourish, which was supposed to elevate our international standing. Nowadays, using this term in our relations with the White House, and especially with President Trump, is a bit risky, isn't it? Given the current administration's lukewarm, to put it mildly, approach to Europe.
It's funny, I'm sure many of you in the room remember former Secretary of Defense, he was Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of War, Rumsfeld, who talked about old Europe and new Europe, referring to Poland as new Europe. I mean, I think you have a point that if you are a senior Polish official going into the White House emphasizing the Polish nature of the relationship, it does make some strategic sense. But I also think that as Poland's role within Europe continues to grow, be recognized, whatever term we want to use, I also think it needs to be clear that it is Europe as well. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's almost tactical and not necessarily philosophical. But I do think it's an interesting thing to watch that, you know, in America, you ask the average American about Poland, if they know much at all, and if in Chicago they do, but you know, it's probably around John Paul II. It's probably a bit around your history in the fall of communism. They probably know a little bit about solidarity if they do. But there is also, when Americans come to Europe, a lot of them still tend to think of it as being Paris, Rome, and London.
I would just omit the word European. I would just keep using two words, big and beautiful.
Big and beautiful?
Yes.
Okay. But I think
that would work.
That would, yes, big and beautiful. I think that attitudes and knowledge of Europe amongst many Americans, even based off of their travel habits, are changing.
A brief conclusion, if I may. In fast forward to next year, to 2028, what will be America's attitude towards Europe? More J.D. Vance, Munich 25, or more Marco Rubio, Munich 26?
Wow, that's such a question. I really don't know if I can answer that. I fear it's going to be more J.D. Vance. But I will tell you that I would not bet that either of them are necessarily going to be the nominee. The only reason I say that is, first of all, if you're a sitting vice president, it is just natural that you would be the nominee. That's just what typically happens. But this is the Trump administration, so all bets are off in terms of what does or doesn't happen. I also do wonder, though, when you have a primary, and our system is very different than yours, like we don't have parties that come up with lists, we have open primaries, we have huge amounts of money that goes into our political system. I do think that there could be a real appetite for something different, so I think we're going to have to wait and see. But I will say this, and I'm a Republican. These days it's kind of weird to say that, but I chose in the last election to support Nikki Haley. She lost. She was the last woman standing, which seems appropriate to say that. But the American people are really pretty sick of this. I mean, they're tired every day. I mean, it's just too much. I don't know about you all, it just feels like too much. When Stephen Miller, just reflecting in the previous panel, when he goes on television and says Democrats are domestic terrorists, most of my family are Democrats. They're not domestic terrorists. I might disagree with them on tax policy or on certain policies, but I'm not going to call half the American people domestic terrorists.
Most kids consider their parents terrorists.
Fair. But I just think that an Israeli commentator the other day noted that he felt like American politics have reached Middle Eastern levels of tribalism. It is brutal. My old boss, Senator Mitch McConnell, used to joke that if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. It's even worse than that now. It's like if I were to go and hang out with a Democrat, I mean, I wouldn't care, but these days it's just...
You could get a Republican dog.
Yeah,
I
could get it. But
or a MAGA dog.
I don't even, what would a MAGA dog look like? It's just all too much. And I think the American people are tired of it, but our political system is really out of whack with where the American people are.
So the conclusion is as follows: let's wait and see.
Correct.
Not very reassuring. Anyway,
correct.
Very insightful and enlightening. Thank you so much. A warm round of applause to Antonia.
Thank you all.